Now, a year ago, she was running to be SNP leader and First Minister. Tonight she joins us to consider the last 25 years and what should happen next. Please welcome Kate Forbes. Hello, nice to see
you. Good evening.
Thank you, Kate, for being here. How are you doing?
Very well, thanks.
Good.
Fascinating.
Good. Yeah, are you enjoying yourself?
Well, indeed, I don't want to say this to make people feel even older than they already do, but it's basically my lifetime, so.
As somebody who has kind of entered the Parliament more recently and has kind of risen to a position of high profile, running to be SNP leader and therefore First Minister, is devolution working?
Absolutely. I think it is working. And
that person agrees. Yeah.
A few observations. I have to say that I am quite inspired by what I've heard tonight for two reasons. The first is I think that when we're in the thick of it, and you're in the thick of political debate, and you're in the thick of the sort of the policies, you forget your origins. And actually reflecting on how long it took and how hard people fought to establish the Parliament in the first place is actually really inspiring as a reminder that, as somebody said earlier, politics and parliaments are completely distinct things. You know, you may like a party, you may dislike a policy, but I don't know of any other country that would suggest, by virtue of disliking a policy or a party, they shut down the institution. And I think that's the second thing that's inspiring.
Really interesting. Andy?
Look, across the entirety of politics, not everybody would like what you have to say, but I think everybody acknowledges your quality. And we've talked a lot about, you know, people who are in Parliament and calibre and so on. So give us your views on that, but also more bluntly, can we be certain that we're going to see Kate Forbes after 2026 at the next election? And what would be the plan there? Because I think that, you know, whether you're an SNP supporter or not, and whether you're a Kate Forbes supporter or not, I think people recognise that you are a very high calibre of person to be in that Parliament, and we need more of those, not less of those. So can you reassure people who think that way that you're still going to be there in a couple of years' time?
Well, that's probably the highest praise I've ever had, I think, in 8 years of being elected. So thanks very much. I mean, I came into Parliament, like many people, to solve problems, not to manage the symptoms of problems. And I know what it is to be in government, trying to do a bit of that. And I've had the joy and the privilege of being in the backbenches for the last year, which can sometimes be frustrating in terms of actually tackling the symptoms rather than the root causes. So, you know, my bread and butter, for example, we've been talking about housing. Someone comes to me, needs a house. That's fine, you can work with them. But actually getting to the root cause of why there's a housing crisis is of far more interest to me. So for as long as the prospect remains that I can deal with the root symptoms and not just tread water in resolving the symptoms, I will be here. But I think all of us need that purpose that's been outlined this evening of wanting to actually restore this country. You know, the big vision. What is the big vision for the next 25 years? We will have different views. But there was a big vision that was shared this evening by each of the First Ministers that we heard from. They had a big vision. And I think all of us need to be enthused and inspired by what the current big vision is. And for individuals who are working in there, we too need to be enthused, because if we're not, then there are alternative jobs.
So let me ask the obvious question then. Does the current First Minister have the big vision, and do you subscribe to it?
Well, I think we are going through a challenging time, and if I can answer that in a diplomatic fashion by saying that it is a particularly difficult time because, to my mind, and I know there'll be people that disagree with me on this, but a lot of the solutions to those big issues, I think, are not currently within the powers of the Scottish Parliament. Now, that's not an excuse not to deal with things, but you saw the list there in terms of energy, obviously has a massive impact on cost of living. And at a time of crisis, people need to be inspired. They need to be inspired by leadership. They need to be inspired by the thought that things are going to get better. And this is going to be a challenging year all round. And I certainly think, as much as I back the party and the current First Minister, we can only win elections if we have a big vision that people can get behind.
Okay, so let me ask it another way. Let's assume current polling is right and there's a difficult night in store for the SNP in the general election, and perhaps there's a change in leadership required at the SNP. Do you run again for leadership? Are you the person to provide that big vision?
Well, that's as blunt as it gets, isn't it?
It's getting on, and I tell you what, my beer's running out as well.
Right. I mean, this time last year, I made a decision to run because I felt like I did have a vision and I had an appetite for change. And I still think I've got a vision, and I still think I've got an appetite for change. So what I've repeatedly said over the last year is I'm very content on the back benches, but if the opportunity arises, and there is no opportunity right now, if the opportunity arises and it's the right thing for the country, for the party, and for my family, then I wouldn't rule it out. But that's because I still believe that Scotland can change. And for as long as I believe in the people of this country and our potential to be more prosperous and to reduce poverty, that will remain my vision.
Andy?
Go on.
Andy. Oh, go on.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought Andy was going to say something.
They're speechless.
Honestly, well, I think
Are the press still here? I think they've got their line.
it's a really fascinating consideration, Kate, because we've kind of discussed this evening whether the sort of devolution process would inevitably result in independence, or whether actually devolution can be a sort of end in and of itself. And clearly we understand where your thinking is on the final destination, as it were. The polling suggests suggests that people in Scotland don't think independence is a realistic prospect, but they are itching for change, seemingly. What do you make of that? Why is independence so far away, according to the polling?
Well, I mean, there's two parts to your question. One is, what does change look like? And then, is independence the answer to that? Can I start with change? I think change is inevitable. I think that, we can sit here and debate whether or not, for example, some of these additional powers should be devolved or not. Having been Finance Secretary, the tax system, as it's currently devolved, is incoherent in terms of part of income tax being devolved and part of income tax not being devolved. It doesn't add up. You ask any tax expert, they may or may not support independence, and they'll tell you that it's a dog's dinner in terms of the way it's been devolved. So that is calling out for change. I think the same as energy. With energy, the UK cannot get to net zero without Scotland, and I argue that Scotland can't get there without the Highlands. And that is
and the northeast of Scotland.
That's predicated. Yes, of course. Sorry, Geoff. That is predicated on local Scottish policies and planning regimes and workforces that are actually going to deliver that. So, I would absolutely subscribe to the idea that the energy should be devolved as far as it can be. So, I think that when you're distinguishing between change and independence, obviously, where I stand in terms of believing in independence, but I think in terms of persuading people and convincing people, I think personally people are there to be persuaded. Because I imagine there's a lot of people out there who disagree potentially with me on the Constitution, but absolutely believe that Scotland should be prosperous. And if the route to prosperity was through independence, they would subscribe.
Just a final, very quick question. You mentioned the Highlands, where I have to declare an interest as well, being from Inverness. Did devolution stop in Edinburgh to the detriment of the Highlands and Islands, and indeed other parts of Scotland?
No, but I think we could go further. So I think one of the things I've been reflecting on as I've listened to this evening is that this coming of age, 25 years, this coming of age, I think calls for two things. I think it calls, first of all, for a greater confidence to share power. I think that is a mark of confidence that you're able and capable and happy to devolve power further. And that has to be to local authorities. But bear in mind, Highland Council is the size of Belgium.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about devolving, let's not settle just on local authorities. How do we go further to communities? The second thing that I'm really keen to mention is, I think, again, listening tonight to those that fought, they had a philosophy, a framework, a depth that informed what they did, how they did it, and how they reached consensus with others. And I think that's what's required again. And I think that would make for better debates and more empowered politicians who actually stand on their principles and, deliver for constituents.
Kate Forbes, thank you.
Thank you so much for watching. Press subscribe and you'll get all the best videos offering insight on Scottish politics delivered straight to your feed. Press subscribe and stick around. And if you'd like to hear our conversations in full, open up your podcast app and search for Holyrood Sources.